Harry Potter Reborn, a second chance to defeat Voldemort and save his loved ones. Episode 16, Welcome to Hogwarts. After leaving the train, McGonagall rounded all the first years and escorted them to the lake, where the half-giant, Hagrid, was waiting for them. Harry was having a hard time keeping his straight face after seeing so many old friends who were now back among the living and looking happy. Hagrid looked at the first years and grinned. "All right, little ones. Get on the boats, they will take you directly under the castle. Oh, and make sure not to fall, I forgot to feed the giant squid this week." "He is joking about that last part, right?" said Ron with worry. "I read about the giant squid living in the lake, but I don't think it eats people," commented Hermione, looking a bit worried too. "Haha, don't you worry, Weasley. I'm sure the squid would spit you back out. He doesn't like to eat trash." Draco Malfoy gave a passing glance to both Ron and Hermione when he said that. "Malfoy," Ron growled. This was the third time that Harry had to stop the redhead boy from jumping at Malfoy, and it was getting tiresome. "Enough, wait at least for the school to start and then you can request a formal duel if you want." "A duel? Oh, that's right. You just wait, Malfoy." Ron's anger quickly subsided and was replaced by joy. Malfoy now looked slightly worried but did his best to hide it. "TSK, like I would be scared of someone like you. I'll duel you anytime you want. I bet you can't even use a single spell yet, . Ron just sent Malfoy one last threatening glance before looking away, but the truth was that he didn't really know any spell yet. The only one his older siblings had taught him turned out to be just a prank. The boats were for 4 people, so the trio chose one boat that already had 1 occupant in it. When the boy turned around to see who else had gotten in, he made a disgruntled expression when his eyes landed on Hermione. "Oh, it's you guys," said Neville, not sounding very excited. Ron looked at Neville with interest as if trying to find something about him. His eyes then widened in recognition. "By Merlin, you really are dash." Ron was interrupted when the boat started to move by itself, surprising the occupants. "Whoa." Ron was about to fall into the water when Harry grabbed him. "Thank mate," the redhead exclaimed before turning his eyes back to Neville, who was now looking away from him. Ron may have perceived the tension in the air because he decided to stay quiet for now. The boats arrived safely under the castle, where another professor was waiting for them to guide them further into the castle. The group of first-year students soon found themselves admiring the Great Hall of Hogwarts while the rest of the school stared at them with interest. "Whoa, what's with the roof?" "I can see the sky," one of the kids pointed up, to the enchanted ceiling. "It was enchanted by the founders themselves, I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." Hermione hurried to share her knowledge, even if no one had asked. "Why is everyone staring at us?" "It must be because we need to do the sorting now," 2 students commented. "What are they going to make us do?" said Ron with horror. "My brothers told me that we have to fight a troll." "Don't be ridiculous, Weasley. Draco made his way to the front of the line where Harry and the others were. "If you have nothing intelligent to say, it's best if you keep quiet." Ron threw Malfoy a nasty gaze. "No one asked for your opinion, Malfoy. I bet you don't know anything about the sorting either." "Hoof, the contents of the sorting ceremony are something that has been kept secret from the first years since the founding of the school," Draco said with a knowing smile. "There is, however, someone among us who may know something about it." He walked until he was in front of Neville. "Maybe the famous Neville Longbottom knows about it." There were many gasps of surprise and murmurs among the group who had just realized the famous boy who lived was among them. All eyes became completely focused on Neville and murmurs started to become more audible. "It's really him? By Merlin, he is actually here. He looks a lot more fat than in the books." Neville lowered his shoulders and looked down, wanting to be somewhere else. "I don't know either," he said softly. Draco looked at Neville with a mixture of disappointment and anger. "I see, you don't know either. Did you really defeat you-know-who?" asked someone. "How did you do it?" a short redhead girl asked. "I don't know, please, stop asking about that." Neville raised his voice slightly and looked away. "Leave him alone, he doesn't like to talk about that." Hermione defensively got in front of Neville. The kids who grew up in the magical world looked at Neville with mixed feelings. For one, they were happy to finally see the hero they heard so much about during their entire life, but on the other hand, they were disappointed to find out that he was nothing like what they had imagined. The ones who came from Muggle families were just looking with curiosity, wondering what all the fuss was about. Draco got close to Hermione, his 2 goons at his sides. "Get lost. He doesn't need from a mood dash, from someone like you." "Silence, everyone." Professor McGonagall looked at them with her usual stern expression from the teacher's area. The first-year students noticed that she was standing next to a peculiar hat that had been placed on top of a wooden stool. We are about to begin the sorting ceremony, said McGonagall. Episode 17, Sorting. A hat, have I been worried for nothing? Ron looked around, confused. Did you seriously believe that you had to fight a troll? Dean stared at Ron in disbelief. The voice of Professor McGonagall resounded in the hall. As soon as I call your name, I want you to come over here and sit on this stool. I would then place the sorting hat on your head. This is a magical artifact created by founders, and it will decide which one of the 4 houses is best suited for you. The first years stared at the hat with concern. That strange thing was going to decide their house? Hannah Abbott, a very nervous blonde girl with pigtails, walked to the platform where the professor was. McGonagall placed the hat on her head and waited. This one started to move its mouth and mumbled some inaudible things like it was seriously considering the matter at hand. After a few more seconds of this, the hat seemed to have made its mind and spoke loudly, Hufflepuff. Most of the students in the hall cheered for her and gave her a round of applause as she walked toward her table to join her new housemates. Draco chuckled and said something about the worst house. Susan Bones was the next one to be called. The redhead girl walked quickly to the stool and sat down. The hat was placed on her head and this one quickly announced, Hufflepuff. Once more. Susan smiled with joy and hurried to join her friend Hannah at their table. Then, a boy named Terry Boot was placed in Ravenclaw, followed by some others. Hermione Granger called the professor. After a long period, the hat decided to choose Gryffindor for her. Neville Longbottom. The murmurs in the Great Hall increased in volume after the name was called. It got loud enough that Albus Dumbledore himself had to stand up and order silence. Neville sat down and fidgeted nervously on the stool while the professor put the hat on his head. Everyone was watching him with rapt attention, wondering which house would be the one chosen for Britain's youngest hero. Harry's attention was instead centered at the teacher's table. He recognized everyone sitting there except for one person. Next to Professor Flitwick was a middle-aged man with long black hair. I don't think I have ever seen that man before, but it seems like he is going to be the defense against the dark arts teacher. Unless they have given that position to Snape in this world. His eyes moved to Severus Snape. He looked just the same as he remembers. Same greasy long hair, the same dark robes, and the same uninterested scowl on his face. Is he still working as a spy for Voldemort, or did he defect completely, considering that the Dark Lord never actually died? He wondered for a moment what Voldemort could have been doing during the last 10 years he'd been missing. What kind of preparations has he completed during this time? The Voldemort of his world was already an extremely dangerous individual, and this one had more time to prepare. The mere thought worries him. He clenched his fist and pushed those negative thoughts out of the way. There was no point in worrying about the unknown. He will need to carefully collect more information when he gets the chance. His focus returned to the professor's table. Most of them were watching Neville with a similar expression, something between happiness and curiosity. Snape was not paying attention and just looked annoyed by the fact that he was forced to be there. Dumbledore was staring at Neville with great intensity, like trying to discern something explicit in the boy. Lastly, the new professor was also staring at Neville with interest, but his face failed to show any particular emotion. He had a perfect poker face. By Harry's experience, this was normally a sign of someone with great proficiency in occlumency. Maybe we will have a competent teacher for once, well, other than Remus I guess. Not that he was expecting to learn much during his second attendance at Hogwarts. Especially when it came to defense against the dark arts. If anything, he was the one who had much to teach in that respect. After all, he had spent many years fighting dark wizards and all sorts of monstrous creatures. People started to murmur and whistle to each other again. It has been almost 10 minutes since Neville put the hat on, but this one has yet to make a decision, and people were getting anxious. What's wrong? Why is it taking so long? Is he too good for any of the houses? People started to say. Harry saw that Neville looked very distressed and ready to cry. He was also muttering something to the hat. Harry could make the word Gryffindor spoken over and over. He probably wants to be there because it was his father's house. He recalls some stories that Neville told him about how his grandmother would always be pushing him to be more like his father while growing up. Augusta may have put even more pressure on him this time around. Given that his father died and he became the boy who lived. Harry looked at Neville with pity and decided that he would help his old friend whenever he had the chance. The hat would always take into account the wishes of the student in the end, so it wasn't a surprise when it finally reached a decision. Gryffindor. Neville sighed in relief as most of the hall erupted in cheers. The loudest ones coming from the Gryffindor table, of course. The energy of the room went down quite a bit after Neville's sorting was over. This was the event that most were looking for, and now all that was left was finishing the rest so they could start the feast. Draco Malfoy of course went to Slytherin, to no one's surprise. A few others were sorted before it was finally his turn. Harry Potter. He received a polite amount of cheers as his name was called and he walked to the podium. People were barely paying attention to the sorting at this point. This was a new sensation for him, being just one of the bunch instead of the center of attention. This is actually nice, he thought. Harry sat down while McGonagall held the hat over his head. Before this one even made contact with his hair, the hat was already speaking. Gryffindor, it shouted loudly. Well, that was fast. He could hear the professor exclaim. He was already expecting a quick decision. During his past war, he spent quite a few years using this castle as headquarters for the Resistance Army. Harry explored every nook and cranny of the castle and studied many of the magical artifacts left behind, including the sorting hat. And so, he has a great understanding of how the hat works. The artifact created by the founders was unable to read the minds of the students, what it read instead was the aura of the person. The personal imprint left behind by your own experiences reflects your individual values as a person. Based on this, the hat made the decision on which house is closer to the student's values. When it came to Harry, other than Godric Gryffindor himself, there may be no one else who came closer to represent the values that house, so the hat did not need any time to make a decision. Harry had become the very embodiment of the House of Gryffindor. Bravery and chivalry, no matter the cost. I know many people are going to complain about the decision to put him in Gryffindor again. But at the end of the day, there were only two realistic choices. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw were out because none of the important characters for the story are in those houses, at least for now. Slytherin could have been interesting, as it would allow Harry to get close to his enemies' children and gather information that way, but there are other ways to do that. I like Gryffindor because I like the idea of Harry being this embodiment or ideal of that house, whether he likes it or not, so the sorting hat would immediately feel this and put him in that house without giving him any choice on the matter. In the same way, Draco could be considered a model student for Slytherin. Episode 18, The First Classes. The rest of the sorting went more or less the same way as he remembers, and then, they were able to enjoy the feast. One big difference this time was the lack of any strange warnings about forbidden corridors by the headmaster. Over the years, Harry had become convinced that some of the many adventures he had at Hogwarts were events that, if not fully, were at least partially planned by Dumbledore as a way to test him or prepare him for his inevitable confrontation with Voldemort. Thankfully, after his 4th year and the resurrection of the Dark Lord, the old headmaster decided to stop playing his games and decided to give him some proper training. But he cannot help but wonder how different could things have been if the old man had taken his preparation more seriously from the beginning. And now he could not help but wonder what this alternate version of the headmaster had planned for Neville. Pass me those potatoes. His train of thought was interrupted when Ron shoved him to gain his attention. The little redhead boy was plowing food in his mouth like this was his last day on Earth. To his other side was Hermione, who was watching in horror at Ron. How can you eat like that? At least, close your mouth to chew. Ron gave her a furious glare. Leave me alone, I'm hungry, the boy said with his mouth full of food. We would like to apologize for our little brother's behavior. A couple of redhead twins said at the same time. They were sitting in front of them. You are brothers? Asked Hermione. Oh yes, there are a lot of us. 7 in total. The twins said. 7. And are they all here? She asked. Our 2 eldest have already graduated and our youngest sister will be attending next year. But you have Percy over there. One of the twins pointed. He is a prefect, by the way. He ended with a mocking tone. Percy, who was sitting next to the corner of the table, did not seem amused at all. Fred, George, you will show me some proper respect. I am a prefect. And you were saying that this is your fault, how? As soon as Harry spoke, a half-eaten potato landed on his plate. He placed down his fork and stared at it with disgust. Are you going to eat that? Ron pointed at the half-eaten food in his place. No, go ahead. Harry had to hold back the desire to puke. His eyes moved to the twins. The brothers returned an apologetic look. Yeah, well, we may have performed a few pranks with his food in the past. Nothing harmful, just some color-changing potions, some transfigured insects, or the itching powder we put last week in his breakfast. That's awful. He is your little brother, exclaimed Hermione. Come on, it wasn't that bad. Just a few pranks. Yeah, Ronnie is just overreacting a bit. The twins chuckled. So now he eats everything quick as to prevent you from messing with his food. Harry concluded. Most of the table was more focused on Neville. He was sitting between Hermione and Seamus. The boy was drilling poor Neville with questions, and this one was too shy to tell him to shut up, so he just answered in the briefest manner he could. Harry's attention moved to a conversation between 2 older boys. They were talking about the new professor of defense. Do you know anything about him? Has he been a teacher in Hogwarts before? Not much, to be honest. All I heard is that his name is Keshav Nair and he is from India. That's not much. What kind of teacher do you think he is going to be? He seems tough. He reminds me of Professor Snape. Ugh, please no. We don't need two of those. The two boys continued to talk for a while. Harry could not help but have a bad feeling about this new professor. If Voldemort was planning on making any move against Neville or Dumbledore this year, the most logical way would be to make use of the spot for a defense teacher that changes every year. After a good night of rest, it was finally time to start their classes. Herbology and history of magic before lunch, followed by transfiguration and potions. He was not looking forward to that last one. Harry has never been fond of potions, and the one to blame was mostly his professor, Snape. When arriving at Hogwarts, he thought that maybe, since his mother was still alive this time around, the man would be less bitter towards him. But the look he received from the man the day before told him everything he needed to know. If anything, Snape seems to despise him even more. That's going to be fun, he thought. The first class was as boring as always. Whoever thought it was a good idea to start the week with 1 hour of history of magic deserves some heavy punishment. The only one who enjoyed herbology was Neville. This was the one time when the boy who lived seemed confident and happy. Then it was time for transfiguration. This was without a doubt his favorite branch of magic. Is extremely versatile in combat and he has always had a natural talent for it. He sat down next to Hermione and waited. The professor was sitting on her desk, using her cat form, and she didn't look happy. Where are they? Is already time to start the class. Hermione stared at the entrance door. And where is the professor? The three missing students stumbled carefully into the classroom. Oh, looks like we made it in time. The professor isn't here yet, said Ron in between heavy breaths. We would have made it in time if we didn't follow you, shouted Seamus. Guys? Neville stared at the cat with a nervous expression. That cat is staring at us, and he doesn't look happy. Episode 19, The First Classes Part 2, What is a cat doing here? Seamus asked. That looks like an old cat, it must be lost or something. Ron chuckled. Did the room get colder all of a sudden? Hermione looked around. The cat jumped in the air while transforming back to her human shape. The students gasped in shock. What kind of magic is that? Hermione stared at the professor with eyes full of wonder. Professor McGonagall towered over Ron with an expression so severe and stern that made the boy shake uncontrollably. I'm sorry for being an old cat, Mr. Weasley, she said with an icy tone. Peeper Feezer, we were just. Ron stammered the words. Late, the professor interrupted. You were late. Perhaps I should turn the three of you into clocks, with the hope that at least one of you would be on time. But, Professor, we got lost, cried Seamus. A map, perhaps, would be more appropriate then, she pointed to the chairs. Go sit down. Next time, be sure to arrive on time or I will start to take points and give detentions. Once the class started properly, McGonagall distributed wooden matches to all the students before explaining the wand movements and incantation of the spell they were about to practice. Turning a wooden matchstick into a metal needle. This is one of the most basic of transfigurations, but don't let that fool you. It is still a complex piece of magic for a first year. I would consider it a success if you manage to perform a perfect transfiguration by the end of the school year. For today, we will focus on practicing the incantation and wand movements. You must repeat these until it becomes as natural to you as breathing. The professor then gave them some time to practice while she walked around the class, observing them and correcting mistakes when necessary. Harry took his wand out of his robe pocket and reminded himself to add a wand holster to his shopping list. He held the wand out and observed it. He had to admit that it was quite a beautiful wand. It was made of ebony, so it was completely black with a nice shine to it and many intricate carvings on its surface. His connection with the wand was very strong already, but from what he remembers of wand lore, wands made with ebony will only become truly bonded to its master after surpassing some dangerous ordeal together. Once that happens, the wand will never answer to anyone else but its master. Harry moved the wand around while absent-mindedly following the professor's instruction. Those are some fine moves, Mr. Potter. McGonagall approached his seat. Perhaps you are ready to give it a try. Remember, besides the wand movements and incantations, you need to create a very clear mental image of your objective. In this case, a metal needle. She gave him a gesture of go on. Harry thought for a moment about how much ability he should show. It wasn't just a matter of not wanting to abuse his unique position to obtain good grades and be labeled a genius. He knew next to nothing about this world and didn't know who he could trust. Perhaps McGonagall was a spy for the Dark Lord here instead of Snape, as silly as that idea could sound. Until I gain more information about what is going on in this school, is better if I try to lay low, he decided. His eyes focused on the matchstick, his hand performed the correct movements, and he spoke the correct incantation. The matchstick starts to change shape before the attentive gaze of the professor. Oh, McGonagall spoke with a tinge of disappointment. The matchstick had turned into a perfect needle, but it was still made of wood. That was a really good first attempt, Mr. Potter. Your father was one of my best students, perhaps you have inherited some of his talent. The professor said with a smile, but he could tell that was expecting more of him. I did it! Shouted Hermione from her seat next to him. The professor looked at her table and saw a metal needle sitting on top. The shape was far from perfect, but it was a success. Congratulations, Miss Granger. 20 points for Gryffindor. Hermione smiled proudly. The last class of the day was a lot less desirable. The moment Harry set foot in the dungeons, he started to remember all the terrible moments he had in this place under the tutelage of Snape. Put your wands away, you won't need them in my class, were the welcoming words of their professor. After everyone was done taking their seats, Professor Snape regaled them with his introduction to potions, and how they could be used to snare the senses, all of that. Harry wondered if he said the same to all the first-year students. The mental image of Snape rehearsing the speech in front of a mirror in his dark dungeon moving his cape around, ended up drawing a smile on his face. What is so amusing, Mr. Potter? The professor asked coldly. He looked at Snape but avoided the eyes. His occlumency shields are strong enough to withstand a passive attack from someone like the potion professor, but are not complete enough to hide their existence. And if Snape finds out that he has a strong occlumency shield, that could raise some questions. This was just one more thing to work on during this year. Nothing important, Professor. He answered. You are right about that, Mr. Potter. Because from the beginning to the end of my class, there is nothing more important than paying attention to what I say. Is that clear? He slammed his hand against Harry's table. Yes, sir. Of course. Harry answered with an innocent smile that seemed to anger him further. Snape walked around the classroom. Why don't we start with a quick quiz? Can someone tell me what the potion, Felix Felicis, is commonly known as? Hermione's hand was already up. Snape looked around. Let's see who can answer this. Mr. Potter, what about you? Episode 20, The Underground Chamber. Harry groaned as he walked through the empty halls. Snape did not stop asking questions until he got one wrong and then proceeded to mock him for his ignorance in front of the class, something that the Slytherin students had found very amusing. The question was about the brewing process of some potion he had never heard of, but he was sure, was not part of Hogwarts curriculum, since even Hermione had her hand down with that one. TSK, what a petty man, ... He was at least thankful for the complete absence of people in this part of the castle, as he did not want others to see him like this. Control yourself. He admonished himself for his outburst. Harry closed his eyes and focused his mind. All the negative feelings were washed away, like the current of a river, and his calm demeanor returned once more. This was one of the many uses of occlumency. He had to give Snape some credit. It was not that easy to rile him up like this, but the potion professor seemed to have a special talent for it. His piercing green eyes moved around and stopped at an object hanging from the dull stone wall. It was a painting of a woman drinking tea in a peaceful meadow. People would pass by that painting and not think anything about it, but this was not going to fool him. This painting was one of the many that were placed around Hogwarts with the purpose of spying for the headmaster. This part of the castle was always empty, except for the first day of classes. The corridor ahead of him was the one that led to the underground water cave where the first-year students arrived with their boats. But there was one more, very important, thing in this area. It was something that only 2 people in the castle knew about it. Well, it was 3 people now. Obscuria, a dark cloud of smoke came out of Harry's wand and covered the painting as he walked past it, and as soon as he was out of its sight, the cloud dissipated, leaving no trace. The entity inside the painting would be unable to detect any trace of the dark cloud of anyone who passed by it for the duration of the magic, as this was the purpose of this particular spell. Harry saw an opening to his left. At the end of a short corridor was a closed door that led to the water cave. This door was only opened by a professor when the first years entered the castle and remained closed for the rest of the year. Ahead of him was a dead end. A short path that ended with a wall and a big painting hanging from said wall. It was a painting of a wooden wall with a stone frame, similar to many of the real doors of the castle. A boring painting for a boring area of the castle. At least that's what most people would think. But Harry knew better. He knew things that only the master of the castle could know, for he has been, albeit for a short period of time, the master of this castle, or at least, an alternate version of it. Let's hope this works then. He could not assume that all thighs were the same as he knew. But this was something he had to at least try, for it could bring him great benefits and make the coming war more manageable. Harry walked until he was right in front of the painting and observed it very carefully. He scanned every inch of it for a few minutes until he was satisfied with his findings. Yes, this should work. He smiled. He took his wand out and started to tap on the painted stones around the wooden door. He taped 10 of the stones in a very specific manner and order before stopping, and then he waited. An empty moment later, on the stones that were tapped, appeared some runes that started to shine brightly with a blue light, and then, a click could be heard. Harry placed a hand on the left side of the painting and pulled hard. This one opened in the same way a door would, revealing a descending set of stairs that disappeared into the darkness. Lumos, a strong light appeared on the tip of his wand and he started to descend the stairs with no hesitation, like he was already very familiar with this procedure. The stairs continued for quite a while, descending further and further down. Followed by them was a narrow corridor that ended into a stone arch. Harry walked past the arch, entering a massive chamber completely covered in darkness. Ah, the foundation of Hogwarts. It never ceased to impress me. As his voice echoed through the chamber, a blue magical fire came to life, illuminating the colossal room with an eerie light. The place is already impressive by its size alone. He knew for a fact that this room was almost the size of the entire castle. The floor was made of some fine, polished stone and there were massive columns all over the place. Those columns were dozens of meters in diameter and were made of some pure white stone he was never able to identify. Across its surfaces were countless archaic runes from an era long lost, and their height was hard to calculate as they got lost in the darkness, way past the area that was illuminated by the fires. In between some of the columns were stone golems made of the same polished white, marble-like, material. And like the column, these golems were covered in the same type of runes. The golems remained stationary in a kneeling position as Harry walked through the chamber. He gave the constructs a passing glance. If someone were to enter this place uninvited, he felt goosebumps just thinking about it. These constructs were not there for decoration, and if an intruder entered the chamber without following the proper procedure, that person would be in for a very painful death. But that was not important right now. The golems were not the reason for this visit. His objective lies further ahead. Harry continued traversing the colossal chamber under the blue light offered by the magical fires until he reached the center. At the very core of the chamber, deep inside the bowels of the castle, was a circular platform, and in the middle of it was a crystal. The crystal was easily 10 times his own size and was shaped like an elongated diamond. It floated a few feet in the air and kept a constant rotation while emitting a pleasant sound. This was the Arkstone of Hogwarts. Its very source of power and the biggest magical stone in the whole world. And of course, the reason he came to this place. Episode 21, The Professor of Defense. He stepped onto the circular platform and as soon as he did, the crystal ceased its rotation and remained still while floating in the air. Harry observed the surface of the Arkstone. There were ancient runes carved over its surface, the same type of runes used in the rest of the chamber. He could only guess what the purpose of those runes was. In all his years of studying runes, he had never seen this ancient language. He moved to the other side of the crystal, where a more familiar set of modern runes were carved as well as some words written in Latin. He was very familiar with this part, as here is where Hogwarts wards were created, and later on, modified. Near the bottom part of the crystal, he found a set of names. The last one is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Every headmaster must come to this chamber at least once in their lifetime to carve their name on the Arkstone, tying themselves to the wards in order to control them and use their functions. Harry placed his wand below Dumbledore's spot and started to write with it on the crystal. Harry James Potter. His name shone brightly and he felt an immediate connection to the castle. Harry knew that doing this while Hogwarts already had someone in command of the wards came with some risks. But he was sure that as long as he didn't abuse his authority over the wards, Dumbledore would not notice anything was amiss. That was not a problem. As long as the castle didn't fall under heavy attack, the only privilege he had planned on using was his freedom of operating inside and outside the castle. It cannot hurt to be ready, just in case. The next day was double defense class before lunch, so he was able to meet their new teacher. He entered the class, along with some of the Slytherins, and sat down in one of the middle seats next to a blonde girl from the House of Snakes. They exchanged a polite nod before she turned her attention back to her book. This was Daphne Greengrass. He vaguely remembers her from his previous life, despite going to the same year and having many classes together. That could only be a good thing, considering what house she was from. But the only reason he was paying the girl any attention was because he recalls hearing their family name being mentioned a few times back at home. Could Daphne be friends with my sister? Or maybe her little sister? I believe her name was Astoria. Attention, class, the voice of their professor was grave and authoritative enough to make even the Slytherins shut up and pay attention. Harry could give the professor a closer look now. His hair was long and black, the same color as his eyes. His skin was dark with a reddish tint to it, and he was built like a soldier. Tall and muscular. Most of his body was covered with a dark tunic, but Harry was able to spot several scars on the few uncovered places. His gaze was cold and hard as he looked at his students. Most of the kids sitting in the first row were trembling in fear now. This guy looks like someone who just came out of a battlefield. Why is someone like that teaching at a school? Harry thought. Now, brats, let's see, where do we start? He walked to the board, his wand appeared out of nowhere into his hand, and he pointed it forward. A name was carved on the wooden surface, with a series of deep cuts. Does he not know how to use a chalkboard? Harry wondered. The words Professor Nair could be made out. My name is Keshav Nair, but you may call me Professor Nair. Hermione raised a hand with some hesitation. Yes? The professor asked. Hermione pointed at the board. Professor, why you need to use the sea chalk to write on those? Despite her fear, she could not stand to see a chalkboard being abused in that manner, not even by a professor. Oh, right, it's been a while since I used those things, ha ha ha. What's your name, lass? I mean miss? Hermione Granger, Professor. Well then, have 5 points for Gryffindor, Miss Granger, he said with a scary smile. Does anyone else have a question before we begin? One of the Slytherin boys raised his hand. Yes, Mr. Theodore Knott, Professor. We were wondering, are you perhaps a former Auror or something? He asked while trying his best to look unfazed by the intimidating looks of the professor. An Auror? Hell no. I am a hit wizard. He said with pride. Does anyone know what a hit wizard is? A hit wizard, yes, that would explain a lot, thought Harry. The professor saw a few hands being raised and chose the blonde girl next to Harry. Go ahead, miss. Daphne Greengrass, Professor. A hit wizard is a mercenary who hunts down dark wizards for money. Good, but incomplete. We hunt down anything with a bounty approved by that country's government. Sometimes is a dark wizard, sometimes is a magical creature causing trouble, and sometimes is a poor fool who made enemies with the wrong person. Professor Nair chuckled, giving the students goosebumps. But you got some part right, so have 2 points for Slytherin. After that, the class continued in a more normal manner. Professor Nair explained the Flipendo jinx, made demonstrations, and then allowed them to do some practice. Harry had to admit that Nair was one of the most competent defense professors he had seen in this school. Maybe on par with that Death Eater, disguised as a crazy Auror who taught defense during his 4th year. But this makes me wonder, what is the catch? There is always a catch. Harry pondered. Episode 22, Miss Greengrass. The second day of classes was over and Harry was, once more, walking alone through the castle. This time on the 7th floor. The room of requirement would make for the ideal place for practice. He paced back and forth until the door appeared, and once inside, he made sure to will the door to disappear. The last thing he needed was a surprise visitor. The place looked mostly empty, except for a few training dummies. This much will do for now. He needed to get used to this new body and magic until it became natural again to cast his spells. With his wand in hand, Harry started to unleash a barrage of spells on the poor dummies. An hour later, Harry was panting on the ground, bordering on magical exhaustion. My reserves are so tiny at the moment, I wonder if I should get some artifacts to help. He looked around. This room was also called the Room of Lost and Found Things. He may be able to find something useful here. I had to check that place anyway. There is a chance that Ravenclaw's diadem is still here. What did you say? Someone shouted. Harry was on his way to the Great Hall after taking a refreshing shower. But after turning a corner, he stumbled upon a confrontation between a group of Gryffindors and Slytherins. The first ones were Neville, Ron, and Seamus, while on the other side was Draco with his 2 goons. You heard me, Weasley, I called him a squib. Draco pointed at Neville. He couldn't even cast a Flipendo. Harry recalled their morning lesson of DADA, and it was true that Neville had been unable to cast anything during the 2 hours of class, despite the professor's attempts to help him. At first, Harry had the suspicion that Augusta had forced Neville to use his father's wand, but after getting a closer look, he was able to confirm that Neville did go to Ollivander's and was matched with his former wand. He could recognize that particular Hollywood wand anywhere. He is happy to have left it there for him. That wand was meant for the boy of the prophecy, the one meant to oppose Voldemort. Taking it would have brought a lot of attention from both the Dark Lord and Dumbledore upon himself. And is not like he needs it at this point. His current wand would serve him well, and there would be no chance of producing a priori incantatem if he were to fight Voldemort. In the end, he could only reach the conclusion that if Neville's problem did not come from the wand, then it must be a psychological one. He knew for a fact that Neville had the potential to be a powerful wizard, but he had to surpass his sense of inferiority first. While he was pondering on some way to help the boy, Hermione came around the corner and walked angrily to the group of first years. "Hey, leave Neville alone." She looked at Draco with a frown. "Oh, great, the teacher's pet is here too." Draco rolled his eyes. Neville was hardly the only one who failed to cast the spell. Hermione added. "Yes, that's what I was about to dash." Seamus got interrupted by Hermione, who had yet to finish her argument. Like for example, Seamus, who set the training dummy on fire. "Hey!" complained Seamus. "At least that did some damage, is a class about defense after all." Harry then noticed that a small girl with short black hair and green robes had stopped next to him and was watching the argument with an angry expression. "Are you going to get involved in this too?" He decided to ask. "Draco doesn't need my help with those idiots." She huffed before her eyes moved to him, scanning his face and then his robes. "What does it matter to you, Gryffindor? Shouldn't you be the one rushing to their help? Come on, Pansy. That's no way to speak to the heir of the Potter house, be polite." Harry turned his head at the familiar voice and saw Daphne Greengrass right behind them. "I am aware of who he is." "I'm not an idiot," huffed Pansy. Daphne seemed to enjoy making the other girl angry. She then looked at Harry. "Aren't you going to intervene?" she said before moving her eyes to Neville and the others. "Their discussion has been heating up and they are now yelling something about a duel. We barely know each other. I'm just someone who is hungry and would like to reach the Great Hall and eat some dinner before I pass out." Harry told her. "Oh, I may have just the spell for that." A mischievous smile appeared on the blonde girl's face. "Professor McGonagall, how nice to see you in this part of the castle." She spoke in a loud manner for everyone to hear. The arguing group quickly scrambled away, not wanting to get in trouble. "Oh, Draco, wait. Pansy hurried to catch up with the retreating blonde boy. Some of the other spectators who had been congregating in the corridor gave Daphne a look. "My apologies, I could have sworn to have seen the professor right around the corner." She looked very convincing, or maybe no one felt like arguing anymore because they all started to walk toward the Great Hall. "I have cleared the way, you are most welcome," she said to Harry without looking his way and then started walking by herself. Harry was left a bit shocked. Did Daphne Greengrass make a prank? He had never got to know the girl during his previous life, but he remembered that people called her names like the Ice Princess or the Slytherin Queen and had a reputation for being serious and cold to everyone. Now he was left to wonder if this alternate version of her was very different from the other one or if this was just a playful side of her that most people did not get to know. Episode 23, Teachers Meeting. At the end of the first week of the school year, all the teachers have a meeting to discuss the new students among other things. "Well, why don't we start with the most obvious one first?" Dumbledore proposed with a kind smile. "How is Neville Longbottom adapting to Hogwarts?" The professors all looked at each other with complicated expressions. He is trying very hard, I think," commented McGonagall. "He seems to have trouble with his wand movements, and his magic in general." Flitwick looked away. "He is useless, spat Snape with frustration. "He got boils all over his face while trying to brew a simple anti-boils potion. That reaction shouldn't even be possible." The professor raised his hands in the air. Dumbledore sighed. This was not what he was hoping to hear. His eyes moved to the new professor of defense with a tinge of hope. "Professor Nair, what about you? Surely he is at least decent for defense magic." "Longbottom? The fat clumsy one?" The big man looked pensive for a moment. "I thought he was a squib, I had to question Miss McGonagall about it." "He did ask," confirmed the professor. "I see." Dumbledore looked a bit distraught. "Well, he seems great in herbology. The boy knows his plants and, I think he has a natural talent for it," commented Professor Sprout with great enthusiasm. "Thank you, Pomona, that is something, I guess. And for the rest of the classes, I am sure there is nothing to worry about. Young Neville must be a bit overwhelmed during his first week of school. Is there any other student worth mentioning?" The headmaster asked. "Yes, actually." McGonagall perked up. "I have a most excellent student in my house. A Muggle-born girl called Hermione Granger, shows great promise in transfiguration and is very dedicated to her studies." "Yes, Granger. She is quite excellent and very hardworking. I was very surprised that she didn't end up in my house, to be honest," remarked Flitwick. "A Muggle-born, that's very impressive indeed." Dumbledore seems to recall something then. The Potter's firstborn was also starting this year. Which house did he end up in? He had to admit that his attention during the sorting ceremony had been focused completely on Neville Longbottom. But he should have paid some attention to the other boys, especially the Potter one. The Potters had been some of his most loyal supporters during the beginning of the war. His relationship with them became somewhat strained after the unfortunate death of Sirius Black. He remembers that Lily had blamed the Order for their lack of direct action against Voldemort and his forces, saying that if they had done more, Sirius could have been rescued. But not all is lost. He has managed to maintain casual correspondence with James Potter after the defeat of Voldemort, and he was sure that the Potters would come back to his side once the Dark Lord makes his return, so he should keep at least a casual eye on their son and make sure he does not fall with the wrong crew. "Yes, he is one of my lions," answered Minerva with pride. The headmaster felt relieved to hear that, but didn't show it. This was the best-case scenario for him. "I'm sure that James will be delighted." He managed to hear Snape mumbling some unpleasant words, but decided to ignore them. After all these years, he is still bitter with the other man. Dumbledore can only hope that Severus will not take his frustrations with James' son. The first weekend had arrived and most of the students had made plans. Groups have formed among the new students. Ron and Seamus had been sticking to Neville like glue, accompanying him everywhere he went and acting very protective when someone else tried to approach and talk to their famous friend. Hermione had talked with Neville a few times and the tension from the first day had disappeared. But Ron and Seamus were not very fond of her after she corrected many of their mistakes during classes. So she was mostly kept out of their business. She also didn't seem to get along with the other girls, so Harry would find her often reading alone at the Gryffindor dorm. As for Harry himself, he had no interest in getting close to any of the other children. He loved the fact that he could see many of his former friends alive and happy again, but he had no reason to interact with them at this point. To him, they are just little children and he finds the idea of dealings with them and talking about toys and Quidditch, just, extremely boring. He rather spends his free time by himself, doing something useful like training. Gladius, 2 swords were conjured in front of him before he banished them towards 2 different targets, one to his left and the other to his right. One of the blades impacted the dummy dead center and sent it tumbling backward, the other blade missed the target by a few inches and embedded itself in the wall. Harry looked at this with disappointment. This was one of his best combat tricks. A basic combination of conjunction and the banishing charm. It was a simple but effective way to deal with multiple enemies. I used to be able to conjure dozens of those and send them out with pinpoint accuracy. He knew that he had a long way to go before he could reach his previous level of strength. It's not that he lacked patience, as he understood that his body was very young and his magic was still developing. The problem was his lack of intel on Voldemort's location and his future plans. The uncertainty was making him very anxious. He could attack at any moment and he was not ready yet. He tried to walk and almost fell down. He felt tired, very tired. He has been pushing himself every day to his limit. That's enough for today, let's go back and take a shower. He looked at the clock on the wall, it was late, almost curfew. Shit, I missed dinner. His stomach complained in response. Shut up, you can have double breakfast tomorrow. Harry picked up his things and hurried back to the dorms, not expecting to find anyone out at this hour. So, it came as a surprise when Hermione came running to him as soon as he opened the painting to enter. Harry, thank God you are here. I need your help, she said with urgency. Episode 24, Malfoy's Plan. What's the emergency? It's Neville. He got into another argument with Draco Malfoy and challenged him to a duel. Neville challenged Draco to a duel? A duel of magic? Harry looked at her with a dubious expression. Well, technically, it was Ron the one who suggested they have a duel, but that's not important, we have to stop them. She looked desperate. Why? And what do you mean by we? He felt too tired to deal with this. Because, they are going to be breaking so many rules with this duel, and they could also be hurt, or expelled. Harry added. Hermione gasped at hearing the word. They could? She asked with dread in her voice. I was just joking, Hermione. They will be fine, they'll get a detention at most. Let them duel if that's how they want to spend their time. But. Hermione looked like she was about to cry. If you don't help me, who will, she said with misty eyes. Oh, come on. He sighed. Fine. I'll help you stop this duel. Don't cry. Harry can't understand why she cares so much about Neville, but he can't stand to see her sad. The girl had been like a sister to him, even if this wasn't the same Hermione he knew. You'll help me? She smiled. So, when is this duel? He said the last word with reluctance. Tonight at midnight, in the room of trophies, answered the girl. He wanted to roll his eyes. Yes, that's the best place for a duel, lots of glass and irreplaceable awards everywhere. I also thought it was a strange choice. It was Malfoy the one who suggested it, and Ron quickly agreed. I doubt he is planning on showing, but fine. He looked at the clock. It was 9 o'clock, and the curfew had just started. I'll see you here in 2.5 hours. I need a shower and some rest. It was then that she noticed his current state. What have you been doing until this late? You are covered in sweat, and you missed dinner. Harry walked away from her. Too tired to answer, I need a nap. She huffed in annoyance, but said nothing. What are you two doing here? Ron pointed at Hermione and Harry, who were standing in front of the trophy room floor when they arrived. Did you come here to stop the duel? Asked Neville. Yes, you need to stop this and come back to the common room before we all get caught and punished for being out after curfew. That's against the rules, you know, answered Hermione. We know is against the rules, shut up. Shouted Ron. You may want to lower your voice. Said Harry. We are not supposed to be here, you know? He added. This seemed to upset both Ron and Hermione. Hermione wanted to stop them before they left the dorms at first, but Harry had convinced her to wait here instead. Claiming that nothing she would say could convince them not to come. But seemed that nothing she could say would convince them to go back either. So Harry was basically stuck as a babysitter at this point. We will go back after we teach Malfoy a lesson. Seamus exclaimed. You really think he is going to show up? Harry decided to speak up. If Malfoy truly wanted to duel Neville, why did he choose to do it at midnight, in a place where no one would see it? If he wanted to humiliate him, he would have chosen a time and place where plenty of people would be there to witness it. Doesn't he seem like the type who would do that? That's true, Malfoy is very arrogant and always insults us when there are other students around to hear him. Admitted Neville. But why would he make us come here then? Now we can tell everyone that he is a coward who never showed up to the duel. Said Ron with a smirk. To get you in detention, a girl's voice came from behind. They all turned to get a look at the one who spoke and saw two girls approaching. One of them was a girl with long brown hair who was looking around, clearly not very comfortable being there. The other one was a blonde girl with striking blue eyes who walked with confidence and looked at them directly and with no hesitation. Ron saw their green robes and frowned. What are you doing here, snakes? Where is Malfoy? How dare you, we even came here to help. The brown-haired girl exploded with anger. Stop, Tracy. Let me do the talking. Daphne glared calmly at the group. Her eyes stopped at Harry for a good second before moving to Neville. We overheard a conversation between Malfoy and some Slytherin boys. He was bragging about how he tricked you into breaking the curfew and how he gave Argus Filch a note, saying that some Gryffindor students were planning on sneaking in the trophy room at midnight for some prank, she explained. So, this was a trap then? Realized Neville. Why should we believe you? You could be working with Malfoy. Seamus looked at Daphne. I told you. We shouldn't have bothered with them. Let's go back. Tracy pulled from her friend's robes. Look, we took a risk to come here to warn you, but if you refuse to believe my words, so be it. She turned around and started to walk away, with Tracy quickly following. You can't go back that way. Filch is there already. Harry's warning was just loud enough for everyone to hear. What are you saying now? Tracy glared at Harry with a frown. Oh no, let's go the other way. Daphne said with urgency. Tracy was going to question the reason for her decision, but that was not necessary when they heard a loud hiss. That's Filch's cat. Ron shouted. They had several unpleasant encounters with the janitor and his mangy cat during the week. So it was easy for Ron to recognize the creature. Whenever that cat went, the man was only a few feet behind. Run! Cried Seamus, and the trio of boys started to run in the opposite direction to where the cat was. Neville gave Harry and Hermione a quick glance and spoke a come on to the two of them. Episode 25, Let's Hide. Hermione did not move. She had gone completely pale and was staring at the cat. Harry knew her well enough to know that she was probably thinking about all the trouble they were going to get in for this. The detentions, the permanent record, the loss of points. There was no time to argue with the girl, so he took her hand and started to drag her away, while Daphne and Tracy followed behind. When they turned the next corner to the right, there was no more trace of Neville, Ron, and Seamus. Those chubby boys can run surprisingly fast, Daphne commented. Where are they, Miss Norris? The unpleasant voice of the janitor could be heard getting closer, and his steps started to get faster. Hermione's grip on his hand got a lot stronger. We are going to be expelled, she whispered. Harry scanned the corridor ahead. There were a few doors. But none of those were classrooms, not that they could hide there either unless they forced their way in. He pulled Hermione a bit faster. The girl was too worried to pay attention to their surroundings, and just let herself be dragged along by Harry. Daphne gave him a few looks. Probably wondering what he was looking for. Harry then found the room he had been looking for and stopped at the entrance. "What are you doing? Keep running," said Tracy. "All the classrooms are closed at night. And I don't think this is even a classroom." Daphne looked at the door. It was much smaller than the classroom doors she had seen so far, but she was still very unfamiliar with the castle. Harry placed his hand on the handle and it immediately unlocked with a soft click. After inscribing his name on the Arkstone with the other headmasters of the school, as far as Hogwarts was concerned, Harry had the full authority of the castle master and could enter any room he wanted at any time of the day. There was no door in the castle he could not open. He unlocked the door and hushed the others inside before closing it back again. "Keep quiet," he whispered, and the girls nodded. They all waited in silence as Filch walked past the door, and they got tensed when they heard him stop. "What is it, Miss Norris? Where are they?" They waited a bit more but could not hear any more steps, which could only mean he was standing still, looking for them. "No, Miss Norris, they cannot be here. These rooms are sealed, no students could open them. Let's go. They must have run very fast. We have to catch them." The hurried steps of Filch started to sound far away and they could breathe in relief. "We are safe. Wow, that was close," said Tracy. "Yes, my dad would kill me if I got detention on the first week," Daphne added. Hermione seemed to be recovering from her panic attack from earlier but still said nothing. They glanced around the room. "This is clearly not a classroom," commented Tracy. The room was a lot smaller than a classroom, was tastefully decorated, and filled with accommodations like several leather couches, coffee tables, and elegant chairs. "I didn't know Hogwarts had rooms like these. This looks like a waiting room for guests. We have something like this in my family manor," said Daphne. "Hogwarts used to host parties and reunions between noble houses in the past, they must have used rooms like this one back then." They all turned to look at Hermione. She shied away from the attention but continued. "It's in Hogwarts, A History, Volume 1. Say, Potter, how did you open the door?" "It was clearly locked," Daphne asked. "My father and his friends spent many years uncovering the secrets of this castle, and he then shared some of that knowledge with me. It was the only explanation he could come up with that didn't mention time travel or dimensional jumping." He walked to the nearby fireplace and pushed on one of the bricks. The back part of the fireplace opened, revealing a dark corridor behind. "That will lead you to the dungeons. I trust you know how to use the Lumos charm." The three girls looked at him with shocked expressions. "If you have questions, leave them for another occasion. We need to be back at our common rooms before Filch can warn our house heads." Daphne and Tracy looked at each other and nodded. "Very well, Potter. We can talk on a different day." She pulled her wand and softly said Lumos. The tip of the wand became bright like a light bulb. She did not hesitate to enter the hole in the fireplace and disappeared with her friend following behind. Once they were gone, the entrance closed by itself. "Let's go back. It should be safe now." Harry gave Hermione a look. "Do I need to hold your hand again?" he asked. Hermione became a bit embarrassed. "I'm fine now," she huffed. They left the room and walked at a brisk pace without talking, and just a few minutes later they reached the painting of the fat lady that covered the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. "Oh no, she is sleeping." Hermione pointed at the fat lady. She was lying comfortably on a big couch and snoring. Harry could have just opened the painting without the guardian permission, but that would have been too harder to explain compared to opening a normal door. He instead tapped on the painting with his wand. "She is going to be mad," Hermione whispered with worry. "Wake up already and let us in," Harry demanded. The lady opened her eyes and looked at them with a very displeased expression. "Is well past curfew, where were the two of you? We lost track of time while snogging in a broom closet. The password is Lion's Pride. Now open up." The fat lady looked outraged and Hermione became red as a tomato. "I never, huff. Children these days. I can't believe this." The big woman started to complain but opened up the entrance anyway. Harry went inside, followed by an embarrassed Hermione. "Harry, why did you say that?" Hermione slapped his shoulder. "Did you want me to tell the truth? Besides, who cares if she judges us, it's just a painting." Harry shrugged. Fine. I'll never ask you for help again," she shouted before storming up the stairs. "If only that was true, I'm so tired." Harry let out a yawn and went to his bed. Episode 26, The Messy Room. The Room of Lost Things, also known as the Room of Requirement or the Room of Come and Go, was a place that has been used by Hogwarts house elves for almost a millennia. Harry passed by a shelf filled with all sorts of items and placed with no obvious order whatsoever. He could glimpse books, magazines, individual shoes, underwear, broken toys, an empty bottle of shampoo, and a very ominous potion vial with some pitch-black liquid inside. Apparently, the elves had been using this room to store all the garbage left behind by former students and teachers for the last 9 centuries. Harry spat his complaints as he walked. He had come here, not just to find Ravenclaw's diadem, but to also find a few items he could sell. After his first week of training, Harry had come to realize something. His best chance to regain his old form in a reasonable time frame was to make use of magical rituals and artifacts. His goal was to do more than just reach his previous peak. He wanted to surpass his old level of power and reach new heights, so he could be prepared for any eventuality that his enemies could come up with. During his previous life, by the time he had acquired much of his knowledge about rituals and magical artifacts, the world was very much in ruins. Demon's first targets had been the magical communities like Diagon Alley, so resources became very scarce, and finding the rare ingredients necessary for these rituals was impossible. I won't let that happen again. He clenched his fists. Lucky for him, this world was still intact and filled with all the resources he could possibly need. Resources he planned to use, but for that, he will need large sums of money. I can't sell any of this trash. He looked around the shelves. By the look of things, the elves refused to throw anything away, storing everything left behind with no exceptions. Of course, most of the things that people left or forgot ended up being trash, meant to be disposed of, but the elves do not have the same standard as humans for what constitutes trash, so they stored everything. They are like tiny magical hoarders, but I am sure there has to be. Wait, what is that? His eyes were drawn to a broom resting against one of the busy shelves. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary broom, but someone who was knowledgeable about flying brooms could recognize the very particular construction of the broom was consistent with a specific brand. That's definitely a Nimbus, and a very old model at that. He picked it up to get a closer look and read the letters engraved on the wood. A Nimbus 100? That's one of the first models ever produced. This is a collector's item. This finding gave him an idea. This place was full of old things that could be valuable as collector items nowadays, like old brooms, books, or even vintage clothes. It's going to take a while to sort through all this stuff, but I should be able to make enough money by selling antique items from here. And if that is not enough, I have other ideas. For a moment, he wished to have the help of a house elf, as it would make things so much simpler. But he could not possibly use his family elf, as this one would report everything to his parents. Alright, let's leave that for now, and get on with the other reason for my visit. He lifted his wand and focused his mind on the object he wanted. Accio Ravenclaw's diadem. He waited, hoping to hear some noises as they came towards him, but nothing happened. Harry frowned, but was not ready to give up just yet. Accio Horcrux. Accio Voldemort Horcrux. Accio Rowena Ravenclaw, belongings. Accio Tom Marvolo Riddle belongings. Nothing. This was the worst-case scenario, and another evidence that despite its many similarities, this was a very different world. This is very bad. Maybe he stored them in different locations, maybe he didn't even create the Horcruxes in the first place, and there is no way for me to know. There are other ways to protect one's life after all. He could only hope that Voldemort did not resort to demonology this time. I should still check the other places I know, just to be sure. If he has created Horcruxes, there is a good chance that one of them is in his old mansion, but with him still alive, that house will be much better protected. It would be a suicide to go right now. Harry thought hard for a while, but the possibilities were just too many, and his information was lacking. One wrong move could be the end of his journey. For what little he knew, Death Eaters had not made any moves for years, until that attack on Diagon Alley. Hopefully, they will take it slow for a while. He could only hope for that at least. Even if he gathered all the necessary ingredients, it would not be possible to perform any rituals on himself. At this point, his body and magic were growing and were very unstable. A ritual would do more harm than good. He is going to need to wait for at least 2 more years before starting. By then, he will have enough control to complete everything safely. But I can't just wait and do nothing. I can think of a way to start acquiring some important information. He looked around the room of requirements with a thoughtful expression. And this room may have what I need. Episode 27, Flying Incident. On Monday afternoon, the first-year students were having their first flying lesson. All of them were standing next to their broom, as structured by Rolanda Hooch, the flying instructor of Hogwarts. Keep yourselves focused on the broom next to you and say, up, loud and with conviction. The broom will listen to your magic and follow your commands. Everyone started to yell at the same time over and over. This is going to give me a headache. Harry covered his ears. He then took a glance at the broom he had been given for the class. It was a Cleansweeper 260, one of the cheapest brooms in the market, from 20 years ago, and it was in poor condition. Is the school budget in such dire straits already? Mr. Potter, is there something wrong? It looked like Professor Hooch had noticed that Harry was the only one in the class who wasn't even trying to lift the broom, so she decided to approach him. No, Professor. My apologies, I was merely a bit distracted. Then let's better focus on the matter at hand. Go on, give it a try, Mr. Potter. She urged him. Being left with no choice but to participate in the class, Harry opened his hand to wheel the broom up, and this one instantly flew into his grasp. What an impressive display. You may have your father's talents for flying after all, Mr. Potter. The professor smiled at him. Ops, I forgot to say the magical words. He realized. Miss Hooch looked at him like there was something she wanted to ask but was hesitant to do so, but her attention went quickly somewhere else when Neville Longbottom started to scream. Ah, help. Neville was holding onto his broom while this one ascended into the sky. Mr. Longbottom, what are you doing? Get down this instant. I still haven't explained how to control the brooms in the air. Professor Hooch shouted at him. Excuse me, Professor, but I don't think Neville is doing it on purpose. Hermione looked at Neville with worried eyes. The Gryffindor students looked at him with uneasiness, while many of the Slytherin, and especially Draco, seemed to be having a great time, laughing and pointing at Neville. Harry knew that he had to do something, so he carefully pulled his wand out and covered it with his sleeves. The last time this happened, Neville got away with a fractured wrist, but there was no guarantee that it would be exactly the same this time around. What if Neville falls a bit differently and ends up breaking his neck? He could not take that risk. Neville's broom kept going higher and higher, and people getting more worried now. Then, all of a sudden, his broom started to shake and collided with the walls of the castle, making him lose his grip and precipitate straight down. Oh no. Professor Hooch struggled to get her wand out of her tunic, while the students gasped and yelled in horror as Neville fell. Harry took the chance to cast a bouncing charm on the area below the falling boy. Many of the students covered their eyes or looked away when Neville was about to hit the ground, not wanting to be a witness to a macabre spectacle. The ones still looking became shocked when they saw the ground deform like it was made of gelatin when Neville landed on it. Unfortunately for him, after the second bounce, he landed outside the charmed area. Ouch! Neville cried in pain. Miss Hooch was the first one to reach his side. Let me see, Mr. Longbottom. She examined him up and down. It doesn't look like you have anything broken, but let's take you to Madame Pomfrey for a checkup. You had a nasty fall. Her eyes went up, to the place he had fallen from. It was close to one of the roofs, where the gargoyles were located, at least 20 meters high. A very nasty fall. She repeated. As she helped the boy walk, Miss Hooch turned to look at the rest of the class. While I'm taking Miss Longbottom to the infirmary, I want no one touching the brooms, is that understood? Yes, Miss Hooch. The students answered. Did you see that? Who cast that spell? Wasn't it the teacher? I didn't see her do any magic, she was struggling to get her wand out when he was falling. The students started to talk among themselves. What a bloody idiot, he can't do anything right. Draco commented before he and his friends started to laugh. Is not funny. He could have died. Shouted Hermione at Malfoy. Yeah, shut up, Malfoy. That's right. Added Ron and Seamus. Harry ignored their banter and went to the place where Neville's broom had fallen. It was still in one piece, much to his surprise. Let's see. He picked it up and examined it. It was the same model as the one given to him, a Clearsweeper 260. But this one was in even worse shape. Harry took a closer look at the runes of the broom. He was by no means an expert in flying brooms, but he had advanced knowledge of runes at least. He was quickly able to tell that this broom had no chance of flying correctly, as many of the runes that form part of the control section were damaged. The reaction of the broom and his fall were a lot more violent than the one I remember. Could someone have tampered with the flying broom, or maybe he just had worse luck? The possibility seemed ridiculous at first, but this was the boy who lived we were talking about. Was someone trying to kill him perhaps? Episode 28, A Proposal. During the next week, many rumors started to circulate about what happened to Neville. Students wondered who cast the magic that saved his life. The professor was quick to admit that it wasn't her and that she should have been more prepared for that kind of scenario. From the students, no one had come forward to claim the glory of saving Neville Longbottom's life. Then someone came out with a different theory. What if Neville himself was the one who cast the spell, but he did it unconsciously? Students have been very open about their disappointment with Neville Longbottom and his magical prowess, or his lack of it. But this rumor gave birth to a new possibility. What if Neville really held some incredible power inside him, but he was unable to control said power? That would explain how he defeated Voldemort when he was a mere babe. He did it unconsciously. During a moment of life and death, He invoked this mystical power and defeated the Dark Lord, and now he did it again in order to save his life. As the days passed, this rumor became more solid and people added more details, like maybe Neville had inherited his magic from Merlin himself, but as a child, he is unable to control said magic, so it will only come to be during extreme situations. The students started to look at Neville with more respect, and even Malfoy stopped mocking him at all times by suggesting he was a squib who only got the Hogwarts letter because the owl got confused. One more week passed after that and things finally started to calm down. Harry's last class of Friday had been potions, with the Slytherings. A very tiresome way to end the week. Snape had relaxed a bit with him and did not bombard him with questions, too much, but he was still quite antagonistic and would not pass any small mistake that Harry made. As he was almost done packing his stuff, a small piece of paper landed next to his hand. He carefully picked it up, looked at what was written on the paper, and left the classroom without showing any external changes in his expression. That night, after finishing his daily training routine, instead of going back to the dorms, he took a different route. One that was taking him past the trophy room and around the corner, to the room he used to hide from the janitor on his first week. Daphne Greengrass was waiting for him in front of the door. "Shall we?" She pointed at the door. He placed his hand on the handle and the door unlocked. The both of them entered and he closed the door again. The candles inside the room lit by themselves, creating a comfortable atmosphere. "Why did you ask me to come here?" he asked. The note he received that afternoon told him about some important matter she had to discuss with him. "This is a very safe room. I did some research after the day we hid here. Those old rooms are always locked, no matter the day or hours, since no one uses them. Only a teacher or the headmaster has the authority to unlock the door and enter." She left hanging the obvious fact that Harry had unlocked the door twice already, despite being neither a teacher nor the headmaster, but she did not question him how he accomplished that. Daphne walked around for a bit before choosing a comfortable leather couch to sit down. For an abandoned room, it is spotted clean. Harry sat down in front of her. "The elves clean every room in the castle, even the ones that no one uses. We have less than an hour before curfew and I'd rather not get detention. Can we get to the point?" "Yes, I'm sorry. I have been meaning to talk to you earlier, but you are really hard to find once the classes are over. I am usually busy." That was all the explanation he was going to offer her for now. She nodded and did not press further on that. "I will get to the point then. I want to propose an alliance between House Potter and House Greengrass." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Did you seriously call me here at this hour to talk about politics?" He found the situation ridiculous. The girl was just 11, what could she possibly know about family alliances or their political positions? If Daphne was angry or disappointed, she did not show it on her face. Instead, she continued the talk. "What do you know about the current situation of the pure-blood families in Britain?" "Situation of the pure-blood families? You mean the whole war with Voldemort?" She flinched slightly at the mention of the name. "Yes, the conflict with the Dark Lord. At the beginning of it, some families declared themselves on his side, like the Malfoys or the Lestrange, while others fought directly against him like the Longbottoms or the Potters. And a third faction was formed by default, a faction composed of families who decided to stay clear of the conflict and remain neutral, like my family, the Greengrass." Harry nodded. He now understood where she was going with all of this. "During the war, the Dark faction was too busy to pressure my father into joining them, but then the Dark Lord was defeated. But not killed," Harry added. "Yes, everyone knows that he is coming back. The Dark faction has been preparing for his return, which they expect to happen in the next few years. And when he does come back, neutrality will no longer be an option. The Malfoys, Avery, and Yaxley have been pressuring my father to side with them." "By pressuring him, you mean threatening him. So, what exactly that your family want?" Harry decided to ask. Episode 29, An Alliance? "We need allies who are willing to stand up against the Dark Lord and those who support him. Neutrality is not an option anymore, and the Dark faction's offers for alliance will become worse as time passes and his return gets closer," Daphne explained. "But their offers must already be quite bad since you are looking for alliances on the opposite side," added Harry. Daphne's expression darkened as she seemed to be remembering something. "Lord Malfoy and Lord Avery made the same proposal, a position as a mistress for myself. While Lord Yaxley wanted me as his son's wife, but only if my sister joined in as the mistress." Harry was surprised to hear her say those things in such a nonchalant way. He never learned much about the workings of the pure-blood families. And no one among his friends or mentors could teach him either, except for Neville, but the boy was not exactly fond of the pure-blood customs and etiquette. But this girl in front of him was different. Daphne has been raised by a pure-blood lord and educated to become his successor. A normal 11-year-old girl would not be talking about alliances and marriages in such a manner. We were also warned that if we waited for too long to answer, the only offer we would get would be from lower dark families like Crabble, Goyle, or Selwyn. And they may not even be for a marriage. She added. How can you be so calm while talking about becoming someone's mistress? You are bloody 11, do you even understand what that entails? Daphne looked offended at this. I am the heir of a pure-blood family, of course, I would know about these things and what they entail. My parents have been preparing me to be the next lady since I was 6 years old. And I'm sure you have also been taught these things the same way. He considered for a second, but it seemed unlikely that his father had done that. He had no memories of the previous owner of this body, but he seemed to hate his parents with fervor and would not have listened to any lessons from them. Maybe they have taught some of this to Lyra, but I doubt they will arrange any marriage for her. Our mother would never allow it anyway. He just knew a few things about pure blood etiquette and costumes. It was no more than a side effect of spending so many years chasing down Death Eaters. I know some things, but I don't think my family will arrange marriage contracts for me or my sisters. Daphne looked genuinely surprised for the first time since they entered the room. How else can you create a proper alliance? One that is strong enough to be trustworthy without a bond of blood? Harry then realized something. Wait, Ben, when you first mentioned making an alliance between our families, you were talking about writing a marriage contract for us? Daphne nodded. When I came to Hogwarts, the idea was to approach Longbottom and start negotiations. After all, they are a very ancient pure-blood family, and Neville Longbottom is the, you know. And why didn't you? He could already imagine why though. Well, the Longbottom heir is not what I was expecting. Then I meet you. You are a lot more capable. And the Potters are one of the most influential families of the light side at the moment. This girl only sees marriage as a tool to improve her family situation, tossing away any emotional part. Harry thought. So you would marry me or Neville, because it would be good for your family as a whole, is that it? He was getting annoyed with this conversation. Daphne looked to be fighting hard the need to roll her eyes at his stupid question. Well, obviously. Consult your father about the offer and try to give me an answer during the next week, if possible. Our father could also arrange a meeting to finish the details. She was talking about it like it was a business transaction, and it was making Harry very uncomfortable. And you would be okay with that? You would marry a guy that you know nothing about because it could be beneficial for your family? That is how pure-blood families work. It has always been like that, is the tradition. And my father cares for me and my sister, he would never agree to marry me off to someone who would treat us badly, that is one of the reasons he never accepted any contracts so far. Harry sighed. The standards and priorities for old pure-blood families were something he could never agree with, but he knew it was going to be pointless to argue with her about it. She had been learning these things since she was 6 years old. For her, this was just how the world worked and there was nothing wrong with it. However, completely rejecting the offer for an alliance would be unwise. At this moment, the one thing he was lacking the most was information about what Voldemort and the Dark families were doing. Maybe the Greengrass could use their unique position as a neutral family to collect some. The problem was that he could not make an alliance like this by himself. He was not the lord of his house, not even close. Lord Greengrass will not even consider signing a magical contract with a child, he will want to speak with his father. Well, there may be another issue, but I will have to deal with that later. He looked at Daphne, who had been observing him carefully. Why don't we arrange a meeting between our families for the Christmas break? We can discuss things further then. There is not much I can do when it comes to making decisions about alliances and that kind of stuff without my father present, I believe. Daphne seemed satisfied with his answer as a small smile appeared on her face. Of course, and is the same for me. I will send a letter to my father tomorrow, informing him of what we talked about, and then we can talk further about arranging a meeting. Agreed. Harry nodded. It seemed like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders now, and Harry noticed how Daphne had loosened up a bit now. Okay, so, do you mind opening that passage from the last time? It was very handy. She sounded more cheerful. Sure, he walked to the fireplace and opened the secret entrance. You sound more natural now. Yes, that was my business persona. Now that our business has concluded, at least for now, I can relax a bit. She pulled out her wand and cast a Lumos. See you, Potter. And remember, we must not be seen talking in public. Good night, Greengrass. Episode 30, Quidditch time. There was 1 week left before Halloween and Gryffindor was about to play their second game of the year after their defeat against Ravenclaw. Harry felt a bit strange sitting in the audience box, but there was nothing he could do about it. Looking around the stadium, he was hit by a wave of nostalgia, remembering the many years that he played on that field, chasing the snitch for Gryffindor. I hope they do better this time. Of course, they will. I heard that they got a new Seek this time. Harry overheard the conversation that Ron and Seamus were having on the seats right in front of him. A new seeker? What a coincidence. Or maybe it was something else. His eyes moved towards the teacher's box, where the headmaster was smiling like usual, while Deputy Headmistress McGonagall looked around the field with worried eyes. Say, Hermione. He called to the girl sitting to his right. She lifted her face from the book she was reading, an old tome called Quidditch Ruling 1890. Yes? Where is Neville? I know he is not very interested in Quidditch, but he is usually with those two. He said while pointing forward at Ron and Seamus. Now that you mention it, is strange. She looked around the box but could not spot, and it was very unusual to not see that trio together. They had been inseparable since the year started. Seamus, Ron, do you know where Neville is? She decided to ask. He left the dorm very early this morning, and I haven't seen him since. I have no clue where he could have gone. Seamus looked genuinely confused. I don't know anything. Ron answered abruptly and turned around to not look at them. He is a terrible liar, Hermione whispered into Harry's ear. He had to agree that even as an adult, Ron had always been bad at lying. He definitely knew where Neville was. Harry already had a hunch of what was going on, and he would only need to wait a bit longer to confirm it. Welcome to the fourth game of the Hogwarts 1991 League. The cheerful voice of the commentator could be heard resounding all over the stadium thanks to the masterful work of magical runes on the place. I am Lee Jordan and I will be your commentator. The students started to clap and cheer. This will be Gryffindor's second game after their defeat against Ravenclaw. But they have come back with a secret weapon, a mysterious new seeker, whose name they have refused to reveal. Jordan gave McGonagall a side glance. Their opponents this time is the Slytherin team, the champions from last year, and a few years before that one, but who is counting? Jordan. McGonagall gave him a warning glare. Right, let's get started then. First to jump into the field will be Slytherin. The green-robed team came flying into the stadium. Their own selection of the spectator boxes started to cheer while the rest remained silent. The Slytherin team was, by far, the least liked one of the four. Mostly due to their rough play and borderline illegal tactics. And now, the team we are all hoping will take the win today. Jordan. This time a stronger warning came from the lips of the deputy headmistress. But not me, I am completely impartial, go Gryffindor! Shouted Jordan. The players made their entrance one by one. There they are, first is no other than the captain himself, Oliver Wood, who plays as the keeper. Next, we have the two beaters, the Weasley twins, George and Fred, and following them are our lovely trio of chasers, Angelina Johnson, Katie Bell, and Alicia Spinnet. Jordan moved forward in his seat to get a better look now. And finally, flying, a bit too far behind from the others is the new seeker, who is no other than Neville Longbottom. The stadium got very loud as everyone started talking loudly at the same time. What? Hermione shouted and almost dropped her book. Yeah, go Neville. Ron fisted the air. You knew about this? Seamus stared at Neville in shock. I caught him doing practice the other day. Sorry, I didn't tell you, they made me promise to keep the secret. Explained Ron. How did he join the team? First years are not even allowed to have a broom. Asked Seamus. Ron shrugged. He told me that Professor McGonagall had asked him to join the team. What were they thinking? After what happened to him during fling practice, he must be so scared right now. Look, his broom is shaking a lot. Hermione pointed up. Harry stared at the broom that Neville was riding, it was a very familiar one. He's using a Nimbus 2000. Really? That's the fastest broom in the market. Ron turned around to look at Harry. You can see it from here? Seamus questioned. Well, that was quite the surprise, the commentator spoke again. Gryffindor has no other but the boy who lived, the hero of magical Britain, as their seeker. The Gryffindor box erupted into cheers. Now, players. Get to your positions. Jordan instructed. Professor Hooch walked to the center of the field and pulled her wand out. Neville, come over here. Called Oliver from his place next to metal rings. Stay flying high until you see the snitch. Remember the training? I know. Neville flew slowly upwards, gripping the broom with all his force. Say, Ron. Neville got better at flying since that day, right? Asked Seamus with some doubts after seeing his display. I haven't really seen him fly yet, but I'm sure he has. Besides, he has a brand new, top-of-the-line flying broom. Even my little sister could catch the snitch with that broom. Ron exclaimed loudly. Your sister is a much better flyer than you. Harry thought. Ready. Professor Hooch lifted her wand in the air and a ball of light shot out. Game start.